Mason Reed pressed his palm against the biometric scanner outside his quarters on Helios 12, the rotating joint research station orbiting Proxima Centauri b. The scanner beeped and the pressure lock hissed open. Nova, the station's AI, greeted him with her standard line, "Welcome back, Dr. Reed. Environmental settings adjusted to your preferences, 21 degrees Celsius, 37% humidity." "Thanks, Nova," Mason murmured. His voice felt thick. 14 hours in the hydroponics bay cataloging alien flora had left his shoulders aching and his mind half-fried. He dropped his sample case on the narrow desk, exhaled, and stretched until his vertebrae popped. The lights dimmed slightly as they sensed his movement toward the corner of the room where the water shower stood, one of the few human luxuries permitted aboard a multi-species vessel. Most other crew used sonic cleaners, but as the station's lead botanist, Mason had finagled an exception. Working with spores and pollen gave him a perpetual layer of dust that only water could erase. He peeled off his lab coat, then the rest of his uniform, and stepped into the clear shower enclosure. A hiss of warm water cascaded over his body. He let his head fall forward, letting the water trail down his spine and across old scars he never quite remembered getting. The gentle white noise almost lulled him into a trance, until he felt it. A shift. Subtle. Like light bending in the wrong way. Not sound, not movement, just a tremble in the atmosphere. Something watching. He turned abruptly. No one there. Just the gleam of the polished floor. "Nova," he said sharply, wiping steam from the panel near the enclosure, "run a scan for any unauthorized environmental irregularities in my quarters." "All systems functioning within normal parameters, Dr. Reed," Nova replied. Mason frowned. This wasn't the first time. 3 nights ago, he'd felt the same disturbance while dressing. Another time, while he was meditating. He chalked it up to overwork, maybe even loneliness. But this time, the sensation clung to him like wet algae. He finished the shower quickly, drying off and throwing on loose sleepwear. He made a note to check room logs in the morning. In the hydroponics lab the next morning, Mason entered to find Talia already there. She stood beside a vat of semi-translucent blue-green algae, her long fingers adjusting the nutrient input levels. The overhead grow lights illuminated her skin, soft cerulean with pale bioluminescent patterns that subtly shifted in rhythm with her breathing. Talia belonged to the Aquarian Coalition, an amphibious race evolved on a water-dense moon 2 systems over. While most of her kind required specialized suits for extended exposure to oxygen-heavy environments, Talia's hybrid physiology allowed her to work freely outside her chambers. It gave her an aura of confidence. Of composure. "Good morning, Dr. Reed," she said, voice calm but melodic. "Your spore samples showed elevated adaptability to synthetic aquatic environments. Your hybrid strain is responding exceptionally." Mason nodded, trying not to be distracted by the way the wet lights danced across the thin gill structures along her neck. "That's encouraging. I'll want 3 more growth cycles to confirm viability, but initial data looks promising." "I have reviewed your notes," Talia said, stepping slightly closer. "Your techniques for substrate absorption are fascinating. Especially your use of Earth-native fungal interactions." Mason gave a sheepish smile. "I used to experiment in greenhouses as a kid. Guess some of it stuck." Talia tilted her head slightly. "You do not speak of your past often." "Nothing exciting," he muttered, focusing on his data pad. "Just roots." She observed him quietly for a moment, then returned to adjusting the vat levels. "I find that the unspoken elements of someone often reveal the most." Before Mason could respond, the station intercom buzzed. "Dr. Reed, please report to the main conference hub. Weekly status debrief in 10. I'll finish the nutrient calibration," Talia offered. "Thank you." Mason packed up his notes. As he exited the lab, he glanced back. Talia's eyes followed him, intense and unblinking. That night, Mason decided to test his theory. Instead of going directly into the shower, he waited. He turned off the lights. Then, standing still, he watched. For a while, nothing happened. Then, a shimmer. Not light. Not color. Something between dimensions. Like watching moonlight ripple through water. "I know you're there," he said aloud. The shimmer stabilized, coalesced, and revealed Talia, her eyes glowing faintly in the dark. Mason grabbed a towel and stepped back, heart hammering. "What the hell, Talia? How did you even get in here?" She stepped forward, unfazed. "Your biometric locks are based on mass and identity confirmation. Aquarians can modulate molecular density. I entered through the vents. You've been watching me." She inclined her head. "Observing. It's part of my independent cultural study. Humans are opaque in behavior. Especially in privacy." "You watched me shower," Mason said flatly. "Yes. And you think that's okay?" "Among my people," Talia said, her gill structures flaring slightly, "cleansing rituals are a sacred act. Observed only when one desires intimacy or seeks deeper understanding. I meant no disrespect." Mason stared at her, torn between offense and confusion. "You could have just asked me. Would you have said yes?" He didn't answer. "You isolate yourself," Talia added gently. "You speak to no one outside research. You avoid communal meals. I wish to understand you." He looked down. A long silence stretched between them. "It doesn't excuse what you did," he said, finally. "But maybe, there's a better way. If you want to learn, we do it properly. Ask questions. Set boundaries." Talia nodded. "Then let this be our beginning. A structured exchange. Cultural understanding. Between us." Mason exhaled. Part of him still reeled from the violation. Another part was curious. "Fine. But no more sneaking into my quarters." "Agreed." As Talia turned to leave, she paused. "For what it's worth, Dr. Reed, you are beautiful in your truth." He stood in stunned silence as the door hissed shut. The dim morning light slipped past the cracked shutters of the hidden farmhouse. Selin sat at the old wooden table, her fingers brushing over the rough grain of the surface as memories flickered behind her eyes. Oren had left at dawn to meet a contact, someone who claimed to know more about her silencing. Zara had offered to go with him. Selin had agreed, reluctantly. The girl had a steadiness Oren often lacked. The silence inside the house was different now. Not imposed, but chosen. Selin's voice hadn't returned, not fully, but words weren't always needed. In the quiet, she remembered. It had been a song. A melody carried from her grandmother's village, forbidden after the cultural erasure mandates of the early regime. Selin had sung it only once in public, at the end of a harvest gathering. The crowd had fallen hushed at its haunting tone. Not in fear, but in recognition. The song's lyrics, veiled in ancient idiom, spoke of rivers that defied their course, stars that turned away from the empire's gaze. By nightfall, the enforcers came. The punishment had been swift. Her name erased from public record. Her voice silenced by neurofiltration implants, delicate yet irreversible. Only Oren, barely 8 then, had seen the truth. And he remembered. Outside, in the narrow canyons north of the village, Oren and Zara crouched beside a crumbled aqueduct. The air carried the sweet scent of juniper and distant smoke. "She always hums that tune," Oren murmured. "Even now." Zara tilted her head, braid swinging against her shoulder. "You said it's old. Older than the Empire's first cycle. But I never knew what it meant, until now." They reached a hollow beneath a rock overhang. Waiting inside was a lean man with ash-gray eyes and fingers stained by ink and grease. He introduced himself simply, Damar. "I worked records before reassignment," he said. "Digital archives, culture logs. I remember your mother. She wasn't just a singer. She was a signal. That song. It wasn't just folk poetry. It was code. Instructions embedded in cadence and pitch. Oren's brows furrowed. Instructions for what? A gathering. A place where language isn't bound by the empire. A council that's waited, for someone willing to remember. Zara shifted uneasily. If you know this, why are you still here? Damar smiled, a tired, lopsided thing. Because someone has to pass the key. He handed Oren a small, cracked recorder chip wrapped in cloth. Back at the farmhouse, Selen sat by the hearth, sketching symbols on a worn slate. Her hands trembled slightly, not from fear, but anticipation. By dusk, Oren and Zara returned. Oren knelt beside her and placed the chip in her palm. I think I finally understand what you tried to do, he said. I want to help finish it. Selen's lips trembled with a soft smile. She wrote a word on the slate, together. In the days that followed, the farmhouse saw unfamiliar visitors. A former logistics runner named Kieran, who mapped Empire drone paths by memory. A baker's daughter, Lyra, who smuggled messages in bags of grain. An old teacher, torn from her classroom years ago, who still recited forbidden texts by candlelight. They met under dusk skies, speaking softly. The song resurfaced, sung low, shared in murmurs. It echoed across worn walls and emberlit rooms. But danger pressed close. An Imperial scout drone buzzed overhead one morning, and Zara spotted new tracks in the frost near the back trails. Selen tightened her shawl, eyes searching the horizon. The Empire had noticed the tremor in the air, the way truth moved through silence. They couldn't run forever. But maybe, just maybe, they wouldn't have to. Selen took Oren's hand as they watched the stars rise that night. He had his father's spirit, but his own fire. He had seen cruelty but chose love. She had been silenced, but her son was learning how to speak. And in his voice, the rebellion had already begun. The air aboard Helios 12 grew still, charged with tension like the moment before a storm breaks. Gone were the days of quiet collaboration and hushed laughter in the corners of research labs. Now, even the station's artificial daylight seemed sterile, brighter somehow, exposing every unspoken rule and watched movement. Mason sat at his lab console, reviewing nutrient dispersion graphs, but his thoughts weren't in the data. They drifted to the last message Talia had sent. Wait for me. He had. He would. Every day since their separation had been a test. Of patience. Of loyalty. Of belief. They weren't lovers in the conventional sense. Not yet. But there was something deeper between them. Something that had no name in either language, but lived in stolen touches, and water shared in silence. A sudden chime broke his thoughts. A message ping. Sender, unknown. Central hydroponics failing. Root structures in decay. Review immediately. He blinked. It wasn't from Harlow, nor from any of the scheduled monitors. With a flick of his wrist, Mason pulled up the feed for Sector 7, his and Talia's shared project. The algae strains they'd cultivated together were showing signs of breakdown. The roots were browning. Cell walls deteriorating. He double-checked the system logs. There had been an automatic nutrient flush 30 hours earlier, one that had not been authorized by him or any human technician. Nova, he called to the station AI, who initiated the last sequence in Hydroponics 7. Sequence authorized by Specialist Talia, Nova answered in its calm, feminine voice. Mason sat back, startled. That wasn't possible. Talia had been restricted from entering that sector. He tapped the console. Show footage. The screen flickered, then displayed a time-coded security recording. The image was grainy, distorted by condensation in the upper vents. Still, he recognized the movement. Graceful. Purposeful. She had been there. She'd somehow bypassed the restrictions. A surge of concern pulsed through him. Not because she had broken rules, but because something was clearly wrong. A moment later, another message appeared. Encrypted. Coded with the old resonance frequency cipher they developed during their exchange sessions. He translated it in seconds. They know. Purge coming. Meet in subdeck maintenance access. Water core junction. Hurry. Mason didn't think. He grabbed his toolkit and sprinted. The subdeck corridors beneath Helios 12 weren't built for comfort. They were raw, ribbed tunnels lined with heat exchangers, fluid pumps, and dehumidifiers. The thrum of the station's core echoed around him, like the heartbeat of some sleeping mechanical god. He found her near the junction, crouched behind a support pylon. Her skin had taken on a gray-blue sheen, a sign of dehydration, or extreme emotional duress. "Talia," he whispered. She looked up, eyes wide. For a moment, neither spoke. He knelt before her. "What happened?" "There's a plan to shut down the hydroponics entirely," she said. "Not just a purge. A reset. Our work. Your strains. My filtration models. They intend to erase it." "Why?" "Because integration became inconvenient," she said bitterly. "Because collaboration created ties they didn't plan for." Mason shook his head. "But the algae we created is vital. It adapts. It stabilizes cross-environmental growth. We proved it works. Which is why they fear it. It symbolizes unity." He cursed under his breath. Then took her hand. "Then we prove them wrong. Again." She managed a weary smile. "Together? Always." Back in his quarters, they developed a plan. A way to preserve their algae strains in encrypted storage. To reroute energy from non-essential systems and house the samples within Talia's aquatic quarters' deep chill archive, a vault no human would dare enter without full Aquarian immersion protocols. They worked through the night, heads bent together, fingers moving as one over shifting datasets and structural logs. The proximity reignited something inside them. Not just urgency, but intimacy. A quiet awareness of how fragile their connection had become. And how fiercely they protected it. As they finished transferring the files, Mason placed his hand on Talia's. "When this is over," he said, "we stop hiding." She nodded. "I would like that." He leaned in, lips close to hers. She didn't flinch. But before the kiss could land, the room went dark. Power failure. A red emergency light blinked above them. "Nova," Mason said. No response. Then the alert blared. "Security breach. Hydroponics compromised. Immediate lockdown initiated." They froze. "They triggered it early," Talia whispered. Mason reached for the manual override on the door. "Go. Take the data core. I'll handle the relay." "No," she said firmly. "We finish this together. If they catch us, it's over." "Then let them see," she said. "Let them see who we are." They moved quickly, like currents flowing in parallel. As alarms screamed across the station, Mason and Talia made their way to the relay junction at Engineering Core Alpha. They passed other researchers running in the opposite direction. Some stared. Others frowned. But a few, a precious few, looked at them and nodded. Support. They weren't alone. Inside the core, Mason accessed the subnetwork. He initiated a final backup. "This will store the algae DNA, growth models, and environmental response data in the core root, inaccessible to anyone without both our signatures," he said. "And the resonance pattern encoder?" He handed it to her. "You keep it. If they erase the servers, we can still restart. Anywhere. Talia closed her hand around the tiny device. Then the door burst open. Security. 4 officers. Uniformed. Armed. Director Harlow followed. Step away from the console. Now. Mason turned. We aren't sabotaging anything. We're preserving science. You broke protocol. Interfered with an official system lockdown. To protect the one viable path forward. And to continue an unauthorized relationship. Talia stepped forward. That relationship may have saved your station. Harlow looked at her, then at Mason. You leave us no choice. Both of you are relieved of duty. Confined to quarters pending tribunal. They were escorted away. But Mason knew the data had been saved. The core sealed. The truth encoded in Talia's hands. This wasn't over. It was just beginning. Quarters confinement on Helios 12 felt more like silent exile than punishment. Mason sat in his assigned room, the walls too white, too clean, too controlled. The artificial lighting dimmed and brightened on schedule, the air recirculated without flaw, and yet everything felt suffocating. It had been 3 days since he and Talia had been detained. No contact allowed. No messages exchanged. Nova's standard responses were clipped and neutral. Access denied. Directive authority overridden. He paced the room, fists clenched, replaying every moment of the relay transfer. Had it uploaded in time? Had the system registered both their signatures? Had Harlow already wiped the backups? Mason slammed his fist against the wall. The polished surface vibrated but didn't crack. He pressed his forehead to the panel. You said this was just beginning, he whispered. He hoped he hadn't lied to himself. Talia's quarters were worse. As an aquatic, her confinement took place in a hydration pod chamber, sealed and monitored. She floated inside the saline water, unable to access her resonance tools, deprived of meaningful conversation. They didn't starve her, but they starved her spirit. And yet, even through the haze of isolation, she held one thought steady. Mason. She replayed his final words to her, we stop hiding. Was that still possible? Did it still matter? Yes. Yes. On the 4th day, the tribunal convened. Mason stood in the central chamber of the Helios 12 Assembly Hall, the ring of officials illuminated in a cold blue light. Aquarian and human faces intermingled, but none seemed friendly. Harlow was among them. So was Commander Relan, the highest-ranking Aquarian aboard the station. Talia entered next, escorted by 2 security agents. She looked fragile, her skin paler than usual, but her posture remained dignified. Mason stepped forward instinctively. The guards blocked his path. She's with me, he said. She stands accused, came Relan's clipped response. So do I, Mason retorted. Then let us stand together. The chamber quieted. Director Harlow raised her hand. You are both here to answer for willful violations of interspecies protocols, unauthorized access to secure systems, and jeopardizing the diplomatic mission of this station. Mason took a breath. We preserved the only viable algae system proven to sustain life across hybrid atmospheres. You were going to delete it. A decision reached by the Coalition Council, not taken lightly, Harlow replied. Talia stepped beside him. And yet made without scientific consensus. Without consultation of those closest to the research. Relan's eyes narrowed. You interfered. We ensured survival, Talia said calmly. Of knowledge. Of hope. Of what this station was meant to become. Mason stepped forward. You claim our relationship endangered unity. But it was our bond that proved unity was possible. Harlow folded her arms. And what is that bond, exactly? Mason didn't flinch. Trust. Understanding. Love. A murmur passed through the assembly. Talia added, among my people, we do not use that word lightly. When we speak it, it is a vow. The silence deepened. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then a voice cut through from the back. I reviewed the encoded data. It was Dr. Elon, one of the senior xenobotanists. A man who had been neutral until now. The algae adaptation models are extraordinary. A fusion of two worlds, stable, self-regulating, and capable of surviving in the most diverse planetary atmospheres we've tested. He stepped forward. To destroy this would be not only political blindness, but scientific treason. Others followed. Researchers from both species. A hydrosystems tech from Talia's department. An intern who had seen Mason and Talia work late nights and quietly admired their perseverance. They spoke, one by one. Not just of the algae, but of the atmosphere that had once existed aboard Helios 12. A place of curiosity. Collaboration. Shared meals and whispered discoveries. And how all of that had eroded the moment fear overtook wonder. By the end, even Rylin looked uncertain. Harlow sighed. And what would you have us do? Reinstate everything? Mason stepped closer. Not everything. Just enough to remember what made this mission worth doing. Let the algae remain. Let mixed species teams continue. And let personal bonds, so long as they are consensual and respectful, be seen not as threats, but as bridges. Talia added, you fear contamination. But contamination is also how life evolves. Silence again. And then. Rylin spoke. A trial. 1 month. The algae program continues under joint oversight. Interspecies collaboration permitted. Personal relationships monitored, not prohibited. He looked at Harlow. Agreed? She hesitated. Then nodded. Agreed. Mason exhaled. They had done it. The restrictions lifted slowly. First came the reinstatement of shared work hours. Then the easing of meal segregation. Then, finally, permission for Mason and Talia to share research quarters again. Their reunion was quiet. They stood in the center of their lab, looking over the algae samples as if seeing them for the first time. Still intact, Mason murmured. Still growing, Talia whispered. He reached for her hand. You saved this. We saved this. He looked into her eyes. Can I ask something, Bold? Her head tilted. Always. In Aquarian culture, is there a ritual for beginning again? She smiled. Yes. It's called first light. A symbolic immersion where we allow new currents to flow, accepting change. Can I be part of that? You already are. That night, beneath the still shimmer of artificial stars, Mason entered Talia's aquatic chamber. She floated beside him in a specially adapted pool. They submerged their hands first. Then forearms. Then shoulders. Until they drifted together, weightless. The water became their truth. No species. No titles. No protocols. Just pulse and breath, electric and slow, alive with meaning. When they emerged, something had shifted. In them. In the station. In the possibility of what came next. A new current had begun. A pale morning mist clung to the narrow streets of Erin, wrapping buildings in a soft veil that belied the fervent stirrings within. Selin rose before sunrise, her hands lingering on the clay tokens she had fashioned the previous night. Each bore the coil symbol, a reminder of flight from silence. Today, those tokens would carry new weight, they would serve as keys to hidden archives, paths to knowledge once forbidden. Yet Selin's heart bore a mix of anticipation and trepidation. Revealing her past would risk reigniting imperial scrutiny, but preserving memory demanded courage. Oren awaited her in the modest courtyard behind their home, where Zara had arranged a discreet meeting with sympathizers gathered in small clusters beneath creeping vines. Their plan this morning was clandestine yet vital: access hidden records in the old registry to confirm details of Selen's defiance and to discover other forgotten acts of resistance. Such knowledge could strengthen the burgeoning movement by connecting individuals to shared history. But Empire agents scoured the city for unauthorized gatherings, each step carried peril. Selen approached Oren and Zara, greeting them with a faint smile. Zara's presence radiated calm resolve. She had spent recent weeks cultivating discreet alliances among merchants, artisans, and scholars, weaving a network bound by trust. Today's mission was an extension, forging connections across time as well as community. Oren felt pride in Zara's leadership, and gratitude that she stood beside him and his mother. Yet he also sensed Selen's internal conflict. Revealing her story might expose wounds she had long tended in silence. They moved through narrow alleys, guided by a map drawn in clay impressions passed among sympathizers. Selen traced the rough walls, recalling childhood memories of this district before imperial edicts had transformed its character. Shadows shifted as they passed under shuttered windows, occasional footsteps echoed, a reminder of watchers. Oren's pulse flickered between excitement and caution. Zara signaled a pause at a hidden doorway beneath a worn arch, the entrance to the old registry, long closed to public access but preserved by those loyal to memory. The door yielded to a concealed mechanism, a clay token inserted into a slot, activating gears that opened the secret entrance. Inside, dust motes danced in the dim light as Selen guided them through corridors lined with sealed alcoves. The registry's heart lay beyond, rows of ledgers, manuscripts, and musical scores in the old tongue. Selen's voice trembled as she traced a ledger bearing her name, records of her forbidden gatherings years ago. Reading the entries, she relived echoes of youthful hope and devastating backlash. Oren watched his mother's pale face, perceiving both sorrow and strength as she absorbed every detail. Zara worked quickly to photograph pages with small illuminators, capturing evidence of past defiance and names of collaborators. Oren catalogued each entry, mindful that these revelations must be handled sensitively. Sharing widely might endanger surviving participants or their descendants. Yet hiding truths risked repeating silence. They resolved to identify trustworthy allies, descendants who could honor legacies by carrying forward lessons in appropriate forms. Selen found solace in seeing that some names had survived in secret honor, small groups had preserved songs and whispered traditions, passing refrains disguised in lullabies or artisan chants.